Hi folks, I thought I'd take a break from some wintertime maintenance I'm doing and go ahead and do a 25,000 mile ride review of the KTM 790 Adventure R. I've gone around the United States a couple times, once last year and then again this year, and of course ride it locally and regionally as well. And I thought I'd just take a step back and kind of look at the year and a half in review, talk about some things that I love about the bike and some issues that I've had with it as well. I mean, to be fair and balanced, you got to take the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? I love to explore. I like to think that I use this bike in the way that KTM designed it to be used. It's a long, I use it as a long range, all surfaces travel bike. Some folks might wonder why I'm not on one of KTM's other bikes, and I'll touch base on that just real briefly. I have owned a KTM 690 Enduro. That was 2017. I've also owned a KTM 1190R. That was a 2016. Both bikes were great in their own way. Adventure bikes, I hate the word adventure. Bikes that are designed to be used through a broad range of terrains and uses are all compromises. If my long range riding involved more pavement and maybe a little less technical, the 1190R might be the better fit. So what was my issue with the 690 that made me look for another bike? I wasn't as thrilled with it when it came to long point-to-point riding on pavement to get to the next fun spot. For long-range work, I give up comfort grudgingly. So what's it been like for the last 25,000 miles in a year and a half? It was a bit of a roll of the dice to pick up a first-year bike. I intended to take it around the country just as soon as, I had ridden it for a bit and got it broken in, and I took off. And I sort of expected to kill the poor thing before I got back, but it came through like a champ, It got me back home, and that inspired enough confidence that I turned around and did the same thing this year. Now, that's not to say that it's been problem-free. At 3,000 miles, my brake rotors had warped. I'm not sure that it was a case of warped brake rotors, actually. I had what's many people, new owners, have described as a pulsing that would cause the bike to pogo as you came to a stop. And I worked with my dealer. We cleaned up the rotors and resurfaced them a little bit, put some new pads on, and it was okay for about another 6,000 miles, and then it started to do the same thing. I was actually on my first trip. Now, the interesting thing, speaking of living with the bike, is that after that first trip around the country, I decided to go ahead and do a single caliper conversion up front. I haven't had any issues with front brake pulse since I switched to a single caliper, and that is still the original rotor and caliper setup on the front. Just got 25,000 miles on it. Works great. Don't have any issues. Other issues I've had, the cruise control sometimes. After a while on the pavement, if I'm engaging it and disengaging it, will stop allowing it to be set. If I pull over and turn off the ignition and turn it back on, the cruise control works again. It's a kind of a quirky thing. I don't know why it does it, and certainly other people have had more trouble with it. Clutch. The clutch has been a subject of conversation on the 790s. I took a look at the clutch after my first trip around the country. I had, like I said, about 12,000 miles on the bike at that point. And the clutch did show signs of having been pretty hot a few times. For it to be pretty crispy by the time I hit 12,000 miles was a little unusual. I think it's simply that it's a smaller clutch in comparison to some KTM have used on the larger bikes. It also is a slipper, so it's got lighter springs, and then it uses the engagement ramps to create more pressure and force to keep the clutch locked up and prevent it from slipping. Another quirks from the factory. Oh yeah, shock, of course. You know, right after they came out, some owners were having troubles with blown shocks. I was one of them. I've actually had this shock rebuilt twice now. The second time seems to have done the trick. I think KTM figured out what was causing them to blow, which from what I've heard, was excess cavitation inside the shock. I had a slight coolant leak right after I got the bike. Had to tighten up some hose clamps and it solved the problem until recently. And I was getting a few drips of coolant on the floor in the mornings that I'd clean up, and I wouldn't see any more drips all day long, and then I'd come out the next morning and there'd be a few drips on the ground again. So I stripped things out so I could get a really good look at what was going on. The outlet on the thermostat is actually oval in shape. I'll throw a picture of what I found. It's been my experience, if a hose fitting gets ovalized, it is much harder to successfully keep it from weeping. If anyone has had that thermostat housing replaced, I'd love to know if the new one still has an oval or whether they've gone to a more traditional round hose fitting there. Fuel tank cinder died at about 21,000 miles. You know, it seems like KTM has trouble with fuel cinders on these bigger bikes. My 1190 was the same way. Actually, they have improved. I don't think my 1190 ever went more than about 4,000 miles between having to replace the fuel cinder on it. Message to you, KTM, if you happen to be out there, let's shoot for a fuel cinder that lasts 5 years. You know, go for the gold. I don't know what the deal is. You know, I honestly don't. I don't know what your challenges are. You know what? Your challenges are your challenges. My challenges are where I decide to spend my money. So in the category of self-induced issues, I had about 21,000 miles during my last trip. I did notice that I've got some stress fractures showing up in the right-hand side tank. Wasn't causing a leak, but obviously would need to be addressed. When I got back from that trip, I priced out a replacement tank, and when I found out what it cost, I decided I'd go ahead and try a repair instead. So what I've done is I plastic welded it up, sanded it down, formed some new skins for the sides of the tank, and I did both sides while I was at it anyway. The skin material is Kydex. It's a thermoplastic that at about 300 degrees, it becomes the consistency like a rubber sheet, which allows you to form it. So, you know, heated it up, pressed it onto the tank, let it cool, and trimmed it to fit. Applied that with a flexible 2-part epoxy to give it some additional strength. And I'm hoping that resolves any future issues. Again, I don't really blame KTM for that particular damage. You know, no manufacturer warrants against crash damage, and no bike is indestructible. If they were, they'd weigh 3,000 pounds and nobody would want to ride it anyway. Too early to know how well that will all hold up. I actually think the plastic weld repair itself was probably enough, but I wanted to add a little bit more to it. And I'll be putting the skid plate back on and the tank protectors, and hopefully we'll get a break in the weather that we're having right now, and I'll be able to get out and give it some testing. The bike is a blast to ride. It's fast, it's comfortable, it's competent off-road. It truly is a bike that I feel comfortable jumping on and going across the country on. You know, I'm not touting the 790 as being the ultimate long-range exploration bike for everyone. For me, it's the best I've had. So at any rate, that's it. Shoot me any questions or comments. I'd be happy to hear your comments or answer your questions. If you want to see some tips that I put out, you know, jump over to my channel. I've got a section of some maintenance tips, and there's videos on there of various rides I've done on the bike, so that'll give you an idea of how it's been used.